Directed by James Wan, aka the guy who created an entire franchise about paranormal entities relentlessly terrorizing families and said, "I'm gonna do the exact same thing again." Malignant is a story about a paranormal entity terrorizing someone, and Malignant is also an accurate portrayal of why siblings are evil. Originally written by James and his wife Ingrid, who actually makes an appearance in this movie, but not as a bloodthirsty evil creature, a cop. It would then be adapted into a screenplay by Akella Cooper and JT Petty, with Akella working on the screenplay for The Nun 2 and Megan, the movie that shows what happens when you take the iPad away from your kid, and JT himself being involved with the Outlast games, video games about a pacifist in a very non-peaceful situation. Malignant in many ways is a return for James, coming back into the horror genre after working on the Fast and Furious and Aquaman with a brand new fresh IP and ideas, quite like he did all those years ago with Saw. Instead of it being another sequel or pre-established world, it was time for him to once again take the reins and conjure something into reality yet again. The movie begins at the Simeon Research Hospital in 1993, and we're introduced to a doctor talking about someone called Gabriel and how he's become stronger and more dangerous because he's been eating all of his vegetables. Perhaps too many vegetables, as we then hear that he's broken out of his containment and has managed to injure and kill multiple doctors and security guards before being tranquilized with free drugs. We don't see this Gabriel's face, but we do see what appears to be the legs of a young child, or perhaps someone who suffers from abnormally small legs. And from what I know about short people and children, they love free drugs. Using the radio to communicate, because mouth holes are for losers, Gabriel tells everyone that he's going to kill them all, just like that edgy kid in the back of the class. It then jumps ahead from 1993 to the present day, which is kind of a lie considering this movie came out a few years ago, and we're introduced to Madison Mitchell, played by Annabelle Wallis. Annabelle, who also appeared in the Annabelle movie, a movie that people only named Annabelle are allowed in. We then see that she's either pregnant or just has a really big food baby, and she's come home to the loving embrace of her husband, who tells her to stop getting pregnant after repeatedly getting her pregnant. We learn that she's had several miscarriages in the past, and he decides to show her how good of a dad he'll be by violently slamming her head against the wall in an effort to communicate with the baby in Morse code. He tells her that it was an accident after committing quite literally the opposite of an accident. And if you're familiar with James's horror works after Saw, this is where he starts to play with your expectations as it begins to show all the expected hallmarks of a James Wan haunted house movie, with the husband waking up on the sofa in the middle of the night after being locked out of the bedroom to hear the sound of the blender doing some blending. He then notices the fridge seemingly open on its own, but he's actually just a peckish telekinetic. After finding Maddie watching the TV, he then finds Maddie not watching the TV as she suddenly disappears, followed by someone slamming his head against the wall, with it then waking Maddie from her sleep. After wondering who's making all of that racket in the middle of the night, she heads downstairs to find her husband being all dramatic as he tends to do, lying on the floor with a broken neck as he's tried and failed to do his best impression of an owl. The same mysterious entity that alleviated her husband's neck pain then knocks her unconscious, as apparently this baby is getting one roller coaster ride after another. Sometime later, we see Maddie waking up in the hospital with her younger sister Sydney next to her, who tells her that she's lost the baby. But instead of going out to try and look for it, she just cries. Strange. 2 weeks pass, and Maddie is sent home from the hospital with a dead husband, a dead baby, and a lifetime of crippling medical debt. The American dream. And that night, she sees a shadowy figure standing outside of her house, as the Jehovah's Witnesses have suddenly become a lot more ominous. So she makes a run for it as she feels like she's being chased, in a visually impressive bird's eye view perspective shot, which was accomplished with the use of a spider cam hung above a soundstage, in a shot that was done in one continuous take to sell the impression of claustrophobia and paranoia, as despite being far away from the subject, you can feel that whatever is potentially chasing her could be right behind her and ever so slightly out of the frame, helping you really feel her urgency. And the next day, we as the viewer, as well as her younger sister Sydney, learn that Maddie was actually adopted at the age of 8, but has absolutely no memory of her life before that. And despite being raised in a loving, caring family, she's been repeatedly trying to have children due to a craving of a blood connection between someone, which unfortunately never seems to happen for her because craving blood is weird. In the Seattle Underground, the old part of the city that was blocked off underground due to nobody being cool enough to defecate on the side of the road and do heroin, we then see the tour guide down there alone, or at least she should be alone, because she's suddenly chased by an angry gust of wind before someone or something drops from the ceiling on her. After waking up restrained to the ceiling, in what appears to be a homage to the giallo genre, we see someone putting on black gloves and a dark trench coat, to pay respect to the giallo movies that tended to be murder mysteries involving a black-gloved killer. And at its core, that's what Malignant is. It's very much a murder mystery film, as it features its fair share of mysterious murder. But it's not just the visual homages, it's the soundtrack too. As in an episode of the Bloody Disgusting Boo Crew podcast, James said, "I remember watching, early on in my youth, a classic Argento movie and going, wow, I'm watching a really scary and creepy moment, but he's blasting this rock score from the right of the screen, and it makes this almost sort of alienating effect." The very same effect that we get when watching Malignant, due to its very deliberate and almost jarring choice of score, which is very different from what you might expect from the guy who also used a very much deliberate musical theme for the Insidious and Conjuring series, where that music was used to aid with the unnerve and terror, whereas here it's just supposed to weird you out. It becomes apparent that this trenchcoat wearing Columbine wannabe is Gabriel from the beginning of the movie, as he once again uses a radio to communicate. Maddie thinks that she sees someone run past the stairs in her home, and realizes that the wound at the back of her head is still bleeding, despite the injury occurring over 2 weeks ago at this point, because the doctors just really couldn't be bothered. She's then jump scared by a doctor from her childhood who she doesn't recognize, who's trying to sneakily do the laundry. Maddie finds herself stuck to the floor in an almost paralyzed state before being transported into the house of the woman to witness Gabriel throw her around the room like he does to all of his women, before bludgeoning her to death with one of her scientific awards, because science is deadly. Take that, science truthers. And just as quickly as she found herself transported, she's suddenly back at her own house, where she learns that what she had just witnessed actually happened, and the same detectives who are investigating it are also the same ones investigating her husband's chiropractic accident. It's like a mentally disturbed episode of That's So Raven, as what Maddie was actually seeing was a vision. Something that Ingrid, James's wife, was inspired to add to the story due to her own personal experiences with violent night terrors, and realizing that there's a really good and potentially interesting rabbit hole to go down there when bringing that over to the world of a horror movie. And much like how Maddie felt when being transported into that woman's home, you don't know if what you're witnessing is real or if it's merely just a figment of your imagination. The same thing proceeds to happen again, as another night, Maddie rolls over in her bed to see what my wife sees in the middle of the night. An overweight man lying next to her. She's transported to his room, and Gabriel appears, wielding the other end of the scientific award fashioned into a blade, and uses it to kill the man just as he wakes up. And for a brief second, Maddie's able to see Gabriel's bloodied and disfigured face. After telling Sydney what she's been witnessing, they decide to go and tell the police that she's been having an average woman moment, and that she's been seeing things in her head. Sexist jokes aside, because she's actually able to prove it by telling them about the death that she just witnessed, leading the police straight to the undiscovered, severely mutilated body. The body, which just so happens to be another doctor from Maddie's childhood, leading the detective to realize that Maddie was actually a patient at the Simeon Hospital, where all of these doctors have worked, meaning that she's connected to all of these deaths. And after digging through the original doctor's research, as she's a bit too busy with mashed potato brains to be using it, the detective uncovers a video file showing the doctors talking to Maddie as a child when she was named Emily. The doctor was saying that Emily is showing signs of psychosis and that the devil is speaking to her. As well, the detective makes the discovery of a third doctor, realizing that there's about to be another killing. A killing that Maddie is already seeing, as she's once again entered another vision, to this time witness an elderly man watching Minecraft Let's Plays in the bath, just as the detective rushes in to find him brutally dead for not liking and subscribing. Don't forget to like and subscribe, fellow Minecrafters. She watches as the detective is attacked by Gabriel, as apparently gravity is merely a suggestion to him, before Gabriel makes a run for it and effortlessly descends the side of the building and into the streets below, in a completely unnatural style of movement, reminiscent of the anime kid back in school. After pursuing him into the Seattle underground, and journeying far further beneath the city's surface, once again the pair begin fighting, until Gabriel says that it was just a prank bro, and runs away. After uncovering the information about Maddie, the detective goes to pay her a visit, where he tells her that her original name was Emily, and that all of the doctors who have been killed were the same doctors that were involved in her case study back in the early 90s. So with Maddie not being able to remember anything before she was adopted, the detective realizes that there are some repressed memories inside of her head that could potentially help illuminate some light on the situation. So he brings in a therapist to try and unlock the memories of her past, or to gaslight her into thinking she's crazy. Whatever it is that therapists do. We learn that Gabriel would speak to Maddie as a child, and one night while her adoptive mother was pregnant with her younger sister Sydney, Gabriel convinced Maddie to go and cut a slice of cake in the middle of the night, before in fact realizing that's not a big juicy slice of cake, that's a big juicy slice of baby. Gabriel manipulated her mind into making her see what he wanted. He didn't want Sydney around, because if she was, then Maddie wouldn't need him anymore. And that's exactly what happened. Not long after the birth of Sydney, Gabriel would become nothing more than a repressed memory somewhere in the back of her brain. The tour guide, who's somehow still alive for a reason that I'm not really too sure about, manages to free herself from the restraints before falling right through the floor and landing directly on the ground in front of Maddie, Sydney, the therapist, and the detective. Funny enough, I keep my humans in the attic too. Maddie's locked up for the base jumping accident in her living room, and the police discover Gabriel's weapon and outfit up there. After not passing the fit check, Maddie's taken into the police interrogation room when they suddenly receive a call from Gabriel, as despite the evidence pointing directly towards Maddie, it's now apparent that there's at least someone else involved here, or that Maddie is just a really good ventriloquist or something. Sydney, deciding to try and take things into her own hands, after learning about Maddie's stay at Simeon Research Hospital, heads over there to pay it a visit, where it uses its apparent magical powers to suddenly switch from daytime into nighttime. And in the records room of the now abandoned hospital, Sydney finds Maddie's case file, where she discovers that something was absorbed in utero, and it grew with Emily. Not sure why a Nirvana album grew with Emily, but okay. She takes home a tape of Maddie's birth mother, a 15-year-old girl who was forcefully impregnated and given no option but to give up her baby to the research facility team due to her incredibly supportive mother refusing to help her at all, as the very existence of that baby was, quote, a transgression against God. Hey, that used to be my nickname too. The 15-year-old girl being the woman who was kept in Maddie's attic, because she's got mummy issues. Another tape shows the doctor talking to a young Maddie, and it's revealed that another person is attached to her back. Gabriel. Gabriel is a parasitic twin feeding off Maddie, who can access parts of her brains to make her see what he wants. She lived with him and a permanent backache for 8 years, but eventually the doctors made the decision to cut him out of there because boys are stinky, and because he had become increasingly violent and aggressive as seen at the beginning of the movie, so needed to be removed. But because they were attached to the brain, they couldn't entirely remove him from the body and only removed what they could. But like a malignant tumor, Gabriel has regrown inside of her head, meaning that in every sense of the word, Gabriel is a malignant tumor on Maddie's body, as he's an unwanted growth that causes suffering and pain, not only to Maddie, but also the people around her. He'd been lying dormant inside of her, up until her head was hit against the bedroom wall, waking him up from his slumber and giving him the freedom to make good on that promise that he made at the beginning of the movie. I'm going to kill you all. And for the first time in the movie, we get to see just how he does it, as when Maddie is being harassed and beaten by the other inmates in jail for the unfortunate crime of existing, Gabriel hijacks her body, something that he's been doing for the entirety of the movie while using his ability to make Maddie see what he wants, except it didn't work quite as well as he'd intended to, resulting in Maddie seeing what she believed to be the visions of the murder. But they weren't visions, she was actually there watching them, as Gabriel was using her body to commit the acts as she was having an out-of-body experience. Maddie's just simply so smart that her meager little skull can no longer retain her big brain anymore, and it splits open at the back as Gabriel emerges from her skull as he's getting some head. He's getting a head. Once out, her arms contort backwards as he takes control of her body, as he's now free to let out his deepest incel fantasies and beat up a room full of women. He pulls chunks out of necks, snaps arms in half, impales people with his fists, and crushes skulls. After having the time of his life, he's able to break out of the cell, thanks to a guard who apparently forgot the basic concept of backing away from danger, as Sydney explains to the detective that Gabriel is controlling Maddie's body. After taking back his coat and weapon from the evidence room, taking good care not to kill James Wan's hiding wife, he then proceeds to go on a rampage through the police department, somehow dodging bullets like the girl boss that he is. Suddenly the movie switches from a horror crime thriller into a scene right out of a Matrix movie, with jumping, flipping, and punching dudes, as somehow every police officer in the room is dispatched by an unarmed angry birth defect. The detective tries to call out to Maddie to retake control, but Gabriel, using the ancient martial arts known as a chair, throws it across the room and knocks him to the floor. Channeling the power of the chair once again, he throws it at both of the detectives this time, and despite quite literally killing everyone else in the room, decides for plot purposes that it'd be a perfect opportunity to calmly walk out of the precinct. Realizing that the only place that he could be headed is to the hospital where his mother is, he causes the security guard's pacemaker to explode before attacking Sydney. He's wanted her dead ever since before she was born, and now he's finally got his chance, except not really, as the detective shoots him. The detective's used as a human dartboard, and Gabriel's about to kill Sydney, before Sydney calls out to Maddie, telling her to fight back and resist, saying that Gabriel's the reason for all of her miscarriages, because like the greedy little boy that he is, he's been feeding off them to regain his power, which does absolutely nothing, as Gabriel decides to open Sydney's third eye with a bullet before killing his own mother. Except none of that actually happened, because using the power of dead babies, Maddie was able to regain control using the exact same method that Gabriel was using on her, as she was able to make him see whatever she wanted. She banishes him into permanent timeout in the back of her mind, and the movie comes to an end with a bunch of dead cops and a person who is probably going to be locked up for it due to the defense of someone in my head made me do it, probably not going down so well in court. And with the movie coming to an end, and with it being revealed that Gabriel wasn't actually anything supernatural, but instead a sentient cyst like the one on my testicle, how is it that he was able to turn the lights off, explode pacemakers, manipulate radios and make phone calls? At first glance, it could easily be explained away as Maddie being the one to turn the lights off or making the phone calls, except that theory doesn't really hold up when you take into account the phone call in the interrogation room, as Maddie was sitting right in front of the two detectives as the call came through. I told you she was a good ventriloquist. It's true that Malignant is an original IP for James, but the story of Gabriel actually holds some truth. Harry Potter did it first. And by hold some truth in reality, I mean it was an urban legend made up by some dude over 100 years ago, and James and his wife were inspired by it. Originally brought to the public's attention by fiction writer Charles Lawton Hildreth, the story of Edward Mordrake tells the tale of a man with a face on the back of his head that would constantly whisper absolutely vile and despicable things to him, with Mordrake describing the rambling as hellish and constant, with him continuously being plagued by the face on the back of his head that would be happy when Mordrake was sad and upset when he was happy. And after years of begging the doctors to please do something about it, Mordrake decided to put a permanent stop to the face by ending both of them. With it being a departure from what James's horror movies have become over the past 10 years or so, he decided to not simply make another haunted house movie again, so made a haunted person movie instead. So before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to go out of their way to help support the channel, something which I'm incredibly grateful for. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great help, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you get to see uncensored versions of all videos going forwards. Starting off with this week's new YouTube member signups, a big thank you to XFR, David Pomrank, Cool Dude 382, No Brain Function, A Person, PR Ebiro, Mike Cresser, Aaron R, Christopher, Ominous, Suganth, Reggie Gigius with Huge Power, Tobias Depp, Hakainum, Aiden G, BBT Rook, Tristan, and Some Dude. And heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a big thank you to Jamie Kim, Nico Diablo, Nina Catherine, Charles Bryce, Blue HQ, Seisman Gruber, Niels Claudie Mortensen, Anthony Perry, Kian Kundi, Sokani Mester, Giblets, Guacamole, Lindsay, Miles Dunn, Andrew Furstenberg, Nathan Callis, and Kevin Klein. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.